Hi everyone, welcome to today's video, where we're going to learn about using lists in Scratch. Lists are super useful when you're creating games because they let you store multiple pieces of information in one place. Think of it like a backpack where you can keep all your items organized. By the end of this video, you'll know how to create lists, add items to them, and use them in your games. So let's get started. Before we dive in, let's talk about what we're going to achieve today. Here are our objectives. We'll learn how to create a list to store multiple items. We'll add items to the list and keep track of how many items are in it. Finally, we'll use the items in the list to make our games more interactive. These skills will help you create cool features like inventories or collections in your games. Ready? Let's move on. Let's start with a quick activity to get your brain thinking. Imagine you're going to the supermarket. How do you remember all the things you need to buy? Maybe you write them down on a shopping list, right? And how do you know when you've got everything? You check your list. Now, how could a computer do this? How could it check if you've collected all the items on your list? Take a moment to think about it. Write down some simple steps you'd give a computer to do this. Pause the video if you need a bit more time, and then let's compare your ideas with mine. Okay, let's break this down step by step. Here's how a computer could manage a shopping list. First, you think of an item you need, like apples or bread, and you add it to your list. You keep doing this until you can't think of any more items. Next, you go through your list. You look at the first item and check if it's in your basket. If it's not, you go and get it. If it is already in the basket, you tick it off your list. You repeat this until you've checked every item. This is exactly how a list works in Scratch. You can add items, check them, and use them in your game. Let's see how this applies to programming. Now, you might already know about variables in Scratch. Variables are great for storing single pieces of information, like your score, how many lives you have, or your health bar. But what if you want to store a bunch of related items? For example, in an RPG game, you might want to keep track of all the items you've collected in your bag. That's where lists come in. Lists are like supercharged variables. They can hold multiple values at once. So instead of having separate variables for each item, you can store them all in one list. Sounds cool, right? So what exactly is a list in Scratch? A list is a special type of variable that can store multiple values. In other programming languages, this is often called an array. For example, if you're making a game where you collect coins, gems, and keys, you can store all these items in a single list called inventory. This makes it much easier to manage your data. Instead of creating separate variables for each item, you can just use one list. Let's see how we can use lists in a game. Let's talk about how you can use lists in your game. Imagine you're creating a game where your character collects items like coins, potions, or keys. You'll need an inventory system to keep track of what you've collected. Here's what you need to plan. What happens when your character touches a collectible item? How do you use an item from your inventory? Write down the steps for these actions. For example, when your character touches a coin, you might add it to your inventory list. Then, when you want to use a potion, you'd remove it from the list. Compare your steps with your friends' ideas. Do they work the same way? Let's try implementing them. Now it's time for a challenge. Try to implement your instructions in Scratch. Modify your game so that your character can collect items and store them in an inventory bag. For example, if your character picks up a key, add it to your inventory list. Then, when you need to use the key, remove it from the list. This is a great way to practice using lists in your game. Give it a try and see what you can see if you can make it work. Pause the video if you need more time, and then let's move on to the next step. Finally, let's talk about how to recall items from a list. There are two main ways to do this. You can access items directly by their position in the list. For example, if you want the first item, you just ask for item 1. We can use a loop method. This method will go through each item in the list one by one. This is useful if you want to check every item in your inventory. And here's a pro tip. Add comments to your code to explain what each part does. This will help you and others understand your code later. That's it for today. You've learned how to create lists, add items, and use them in your games. Now go ahead and try it out in Scratch. Thanks for watching and happy coding.